A question that I often get asked is, should I use EQ or compression on my track first? Well, that really depends. So I'm going to take you inside a track here and break down two different situations. One where you're going to definitely want to use EQ before compression. Another situation where using compression before the EQ actually is going to give you a bunch of different advantages. You really need to think about what instrument you're going to be applying this EQ or compression to. What is the track like? What are the dynamics of it? What is the purpose of the track? And so it really can fit a number of different situations. For example, if you have a track with a lot of really woofy frequencies, throwing a compressor on it first is only going to exaggerate those bad frequencies. Using an EQ first is going to help you feed the compressor some better material to begin with. But if the track is lacking something in terms of dynamics or energy to begin with, sometimes you need to throw on a compressor first. So I'm going to describe those two different situations here in my DAW, and I'm going to break down how to use EQ and compression properly and in which order. Before that, really quick, if you're struggling to get great sounding recordings and mixes in your home studio, I've got some free guides in the description down below, including the Home Studio Toolbox, which is a bunch of free plugins to help you with re-recordings. And if you're interested in getting direct help with me one-on-one, you can go to the link down below and you can look into working with me there. Okay, let's dive into this session now. All right, so I have this mix here. I'm just going to play a few seconds of it to give you an idea what the track sounds like. Okay, so the first instance I'm going to get to is using EQ before compression. Let's go to the vocal to check that out here. So here's all my vocal stacks. All the vocals together sound like this. I want to highlight just the lead vocal for now, which sounds like this in solo with all the effects on it. So what did I do with this? This is my Vox All Bus. All my vocals are going to be fed through this. What did I do first on this track? Well, I used EQ before compression on this vocal track here. So you can see before it even hit the compressor, I added 7 dB of top end. At the 7.5K range, at the 3K range, I added another 7.5-ish dB there. I took out some low mid information at 691 Hertz. I rolled off everything below 94.4, and I took out 4 dB at 691. The reason you want to do this with vocals most of the time is when a vocalist sings into a microphone, there's a lot of low end, there's a lot of sub information, a lot of low mid room frequencies, especially in a home studio recording, that are getting into the microphone, which is okay. But if the first thing you do is slap a compressor on that, all it's going to do is exaggerate all those bad frequencies, all those room sounds, all that low end in the track before you even get to the rest of the processing. You're going to spend a lot of time trying to fight that with EQ later. The best approach with this is just come in with an EQ first, take out the bad stuff, enhance the good stuff, then come in with your first compressor. Yes, you can do later stages of EQing and compressing all the time. That's totally fine. But before your vocal goes through all those waves of processing, you're going to save yourself a lot of time and headache by just getting rid of the bad stuff. So for example, if I disable the EQ here, you can see how much more woofy the vocal is going to sound. I'm going to disable some of these other plugins, pretending we're sort of in the initial stages of the mixing stage here.
I've been here for so long.
There's a lot of low mid information, a lot of sub information there. Let me turn the EQ back on.
I've been here for so long, the raven.
Way sharper and way more present. Let me disable that EQ again.
I've been here for so long, the ravens roosting are gone, been hanging around.
It's a massive difference. And if I came in and I decided, okay, we're going to compress first, let's throw the EQ on, I'd have to do a lot more moves to get it to sound like that.
I've been here for so long, the ravens roosting are gone, been hanging around for hundreds of years. I've been here.
Doesn't quite sound as good as this.
I've been here for so long, the ravens roosting.
So then, yes, you can come in with your additional layers of like limiting and compression, but I'm always, when I go to the vocals, my first thought is, let's get an EQ on it. Let's take out the bad frequencies. Because I mean, listen to some of these room tones here on the vocal itself.
I've been here for so long, the ravens room. I've been here for so long,
So it's just really integral that I get that EQ on. So when it comes to vocals, 99.9% of the time, EQ before compression. However, to give you an example of using compression before EQ, I'm going to have you take a look at this bass guitar DI. So listen up to this real quick here. I'm going to disable the plugins. This is the bass guitar DI I got for this track. Okay, so it's a good sound. It's well played, it's in time, and it's in tune. But look at the waveforms here. It's fairly dynamic across the performance. And so we could just say, hey, we're going to use compression later. But for this DI, I wanted to throw an amp sound on. And one of the really big keys when it comes to getting a bass guitar amp sound, I find that if you just throw the amp on immediately and the bass DI is not that well compressed, you're not going to get the best amped sound. So what I like to do is before I even feed it into something like Amplitude 5, which for example, I'm using an Ampeg setting here. So I'm using the SVX48. That's just an Ampeg model with the gain and bass turned up, Ampeg cab, pretty straightforward sound. But what I did before that was use the CLA76 compressor. You can use any compressor actually, so you don't have to use this one. But this one does a good job. I have the CLA setting here, giving it about 10 to 15 dB of gain reduction, just to make the playing seem more consistent. And so you don't want to absolutely slam it. I don't really hit the bass guitar with like a limiter or anything. You still want some dynamics. It's going to depend on your track, but I really want the playing to feel more consistent. So when it hits this amp, when it hits the Ampeg amp, it feels more consistent. I'm getting a more consistent tone when it comes to the rest of my processing. I won't be doing as much fighting with limiters, automation, getting the low end to sit right. Feel how consistent that is. Now when I take the compressor off, there's some notes with just no low end. And I just have a way more consistent tone to work with now when I include it in the rest of the mix. So when I throw the rest of my processing on, such as the virtual mix rack, using limiters, using more compression, you can feel the low end's tighter. We're getting more out of that amp sound. We're gonna have to do less work in the mixing stage. So when I turn the whole track on, you hear that bass guitar is present, it's full, it feels like there's a low end in every note, which is really a goal that I have when I mix bass guitar, is I don't want to feel like the low end disappears on one note and then really shows up really heavy on another note, unless that's what they're trying to go for. But for a lot of mixes, you want that to be really consistent, and compressing your bass DI before it hits the amp is a great way to do that. So that's my tips when it comes to using EQ or compression first. On things like vocals, yes, you're going to want to go with EQ before it hits the compressor to remove those bad frequencies, enhance the good stuff, then compress that vocal hard. In some instances with the bass guitar, it really is advantageous to hit it with a compressor first before it hits an amp or the rest of your signal chain to give it a consistent sound, especially if you see in the waveform it wasn't compressed going on the way in. Now, sometimes people compress bass on the way in. In that case, leave it alone, but you could see in the waveform that this needed to be compressed on the way in. So if you have any questions about that, leave it in a comment down below. I have that free guide for you, the Home Studio Toolbox. You can pick that up in the description down below as well. Leave a comment. Do you use EQ or compression first? Does it depend on the instrument? I'd like to hear your guys' takes on that, because there's no right way to do everything. This is just my approach. This is a lot of mixing engineers' approach. So I'd like to hear that in a comment down below. Thanks so much for watching. Anyways, I will see you guys next time.